Welcome back to Unfiltered Unspoken. And today we have Omni Wren joining us today, and she has a testimony to tell as well. It's more so to adult traumas, not childhood traumas. So we're bringing all different walks of life, and hopefully she will connect with you. So I'm going to bring Omni up. Omni, thank you for tuning in to Unfiltered Unspoken.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Honor. Oh, go ahead, Omni. Sorry.
Oh, okay, you just put me up. I was like,
Yes, we put you
hello.
up.
So I'm Omni Wren, and I'm a transformational coach, and I work with those who have sustained life-changing injuries and traumas. And I got into this because of my own experience. So back when I was 21, 15 years ago, I was a young girl. I was quite happy. I was in a full-time degree and I had a long-term partner. I had my flat, which was lovely, and I had 3 jobs. And then I'd left the studio one evening and I got into a car accident, which impacted my life massively. And I got all amounts of injuries down my right side, and I got a hunch, and eventually I got addicted to medicated drugs and ended up in a rehabilitation centre. And I lived in there for a little while before I came out. And I started building my life back up, and I moved out of my parents, and I started gathering my social circle. And eventually I got another job, which I was really psyched about. And on the morning of the job, I was on the way and I got in another car accident on the way, which I did not ever think would happen, ever. And so this one was worse. I sustained injuries down my left this time, and I developed PTSD and severe depression. And I was in and out of hospital for a little while, actually. I was in and out. And eventually I had emergency surgery, to which I almost lost my life to. I spent 5 weeks in a hospital bed being fed by all these machines. I didn't think I was going to get out of there, but I did. And I moved back home, back to my parents, and then I gathered and moved back to my own house, which was lovely. And then I sort of plateaued and I started going downhill again, and nobody knew why. And turns out 2 years after that, I had another blood test, and my blood came out and it was transparent. And I'd been internally bleeding for that entirety of the time. So for 2 years after that surgery, I had been internally bleeding, and I only had a fifth of the blood cells that I should have had. Not to mention that I had no iron to speak of, and my resources were extremely low. And then I ended up having emergency transfusions to get better. And then I gradually, because I came through services and I came through the courts, I realized that I wanted to change people's lives. I didn't want them to be going through this or hearing the things that I was hearing. And eventually I went and did my training, and I trained to be a transformational coach. And so that is what I do now. I talk to others. I coach them back into work, back into their lives, back into their relationships, help them take control of everything they think they've lost. That's my job.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a lovely synopsis. You gave us a lot to work with. Thank you. But for one, thank you for being here and sharing your testimony, because you are a perfect example of how drug addiction and mental illness can touch all walks of life. At any point in time, regardless of whether your upbringing was fine and dandy, there's always a chance, you can kind of hit a wall. So thank you for being here to kind of give us that example, real life example. I do want to ask, with the initial accident, was it something that was your fault? Was it the other person's fault? Like, what were the kind of facts of loss around that accident?
Yeah, so the first one, I was sat at traffic lights. Actually, I was sat at a red light. I was just sat at a red light, and the guy, he came down the hill and didn't stop, just plowed straight into the back of me. And then the second car accident, I was turning right into a junction with my sister, and the guy behind, he'd come around a blind bend, overtaken 4 cars, swung in, he was speeding, and then he'd swung out and didn't see that we were turning right, and then just took us out by the side. So yeah, so neither of them actually were my fault, which is I suppose makes it even worse. I did at the time. Like I don't
Yeah.
but at the time, like it was out of my I always felt like I was a victim, like somebody did that to me. Yeah.
I mean, respectfully, because you're not out here
Mhm.
wrecking people's cars and injuring them and stuff like that. If you've ever, so it's just like that. They have a responsibility to not, you know,
Yeah, to not do that, but
yeah.
And
yeah.
Omni is in UK too, so we are in UK again. So I wanted, so when she's talking about the cars, I know the streets and stuff are different.
Oh, I
I wanted
see.
to let her
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
We're on the other side of the road. Yeah, we are. Yeah. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
Now, what for the first car accident? What were your specific injuries? What were you dealing with? What actually happened? As a result of the accident.
Yeah, so I got nerve damage down my right side for that one, and I lost sensation in my pincers, and then I developed chronic pain, so I had like whiplash and soft tissue damage, and then so because I got chronic pain, then I was like holding myself, and I developed a hunch then like after time, and then I ended up I was getting my back strapped in the end to get me like straightened back up, because I was just always like this, always holding myself down. So those were my injuries for the first one. That stopped me. So my degree, actually, I was a glass blower at the time. So I was blowing and casting glass, and then I just couldn't lift the weights of it anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore, which was a bit bad, really. A bit bad. It's a journey. It's a journey, isn't it? It's not like when I say it's a bit bad, it just changed the entire trajectory of my life. I had to go and do something else then.
So can you make some of the physical, like the physical pieces of it? Did you have to, for your job, you couldn't lift a certain weight, but other aspects of it, were you home for a long time? Did someone have to take care of you?
Yeah. So I was home for a long time. I went straight to my bed actually, and I was there for a good few months before I started getting up and doing stretches. I was working with physiotherapists. I was working with hydrotherapy to try and get my movement back. I didn't get back in a car I didn't drive again after the first car accident for probably about a year. So then I was being driven around just because I was in so much pain that I couldn't. And then also, so in my work to finish my degree, I was also getting help to do that because, like, I don't know if you've ever seen, it's quite a physical job, like lifting and shifting, and then there's a pivot point on the end because you're glass blowing on a stick, which exaggerates the weights. Then that was quite a difficult time for me. That was quite a difficult time. And then when I went into the rehabilitation centre, when I went in there, it was specifically for pain patients. And so in there, I did practices like I couldn't walk up and down the stairs very well. They had me in and out of hydro pools, in and out of like steam rooms and like saunas, doing stretches. It's quite an intense, like, get back to your physical health. So it took me a really long time to get back to that, to be honest.
Now, when I hear stories, I wonder the craziest thing or probably the most outlandish things about them. But I assume some people think like myself. So, and I'm also an insurance agent in the US. So I would like to know, like, how was first of all, I don't know how, insurance works at all. And I never thought to look it up. But how was your experience with that? Was the person insured? How was your experience with, getting your injuries and things paid for, taken care of? How long was that process? Was it painful? Like, what was that part of it like for you? And was outside of maybe not being able to work, was there any, financial burden as a result?
Okay, well, yeah. So in the UK, we have insurance companies, much the same as yours, I'm sure. And the guy actually who drove into me the first time, he was quite well. I think he thought he was smart, maybe. So he actually tried to get away from it. So he actually tried to deny that it was him. He sold his car. He cancelled his insurance. He tried to force me down. He tried to say that I picked on him, basically. And he tried to force me down the uninsured driver's route. But actually, by law, because he was driving that car and because he was insured at the time, it didn't matter whether he cancelled those insurances or not. He was still insured by them. So I was quite lucky in that respect. And I started off with like a board of solicitors. So our insurance companies, quite often there's like a solicitor and then they have like handlers. So I started there, and then I wasn't getting to where I wanted to go, and I felt like I was being passed around. And then eventually I went and did a no win, no fee. I found another solicitor to work with privately, and I worked with him, and I was really lucky. He was actually really amazing. And so when I came out of that, that took me 6.5 years to get through the court with that, to get through all of my sessions, all of my paperwork, all of my diagnosis. It took me 6.5 years before they closed that case, and I did get all of my medical fees covered. So I was really lucky in that respect. Really lucky.
Wow, 6.5 years is a long time. So your other accident, did it happen within that 6 year span?
So I was free from the courts for about 6 months. So I just wrapped that up, just finished that, just closed the door on that, just got back to my life, and I was on the way. To my new job, and boom, rug from under me
So the
again, all
same
over again.
so the same question Sid asked, did the second driver take accountability? Did you have to go through the same process as the first driver?
I did, but it was slightly more complicated this time because obviously I already had all these injuries that I sustained in the first one. And so I had to prove that I got more injuries. I had to, it was so much more invasive in terms of like doctors and diagnosis. And they treated me a lot harder this time because they were like, well, but he was quite a smart businessman, the guy who drove into us the second time. And he was like, yeah, but she already had this. And then that sort of made it more difficult to navigate. But again, and luckily I'd already had my solicitor previous. So when it came to that, I just went directly to him. So I didn't have to deal with this board situation this time. I just went straight off and said to him, which is quite funny because I rang him up and I said, like, look, you're never going to guess. And he said, look, if you want a cup of tea, you can just come into the office. And I was like, no, I'm being serious. And he was like, oh God. And I was like, yeah. So, and then obviously my sister came under his care as well then. So I was already really familiar with my solicitor. I already knew him really well, but much the same process. And then that took me years to get out of as well.
Now,
Yeah.
does that I guess the length of time that it takes to get everything situated, does that also like chip away at the money that was awarded to you? Did
Yeah.
you have to pay, or did you sue them separately, or was it all just kind of within insurance? Like, what was your process there?
Yeah, so it was all within my insurance. It was all housed in that. So when I was going to see these professionals, I was going to go see doctors. It was just coming as an interim bill, basically. So like I didn't get the bill directly. It just stacked up, and then when it got to the courts, they cleared it straight from there. Especially like all my medical debt, all my prescriptions, my rehabilitation. What else did I? And then like so I'd had to travel, so I'm down in the south. I'd had to travel up to London quite a lot to see these professionals, and so they'd covered like my traveling expenses as well. So whilst I had to outlay some of them, a lot of it was all housed in the insurance claim, so I didn't get like a fat bill, if you like. Yeah.
So on the second accident, you said you had almost lost your life to surgery. You have went into surgery. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I just had like chronic stomach ache, actually, like for 2 years I was in and out of A&E, and they didn't know what was wrong, and then eventually I went in and I was like, I am in agony, like you're gonna have a look. And what had happened actually was my intestine had twisted, and it had blocked, and it was like ready to rupture. So this surgery, I actually had the whole of my right large intestine taken out and some of my small intestine. And then my body went into shock, which you would imagine would is something that could happen, right? So my body went into shock, and then none of my digestive system was working at all. And so then I ended up on many machines. I had like cannulas in me, I had painkillers coming into me, I had catheters. I was just in my bed, like helpless, really. And then my wound as well. So when they said that I'd go down to the surgery, they said, I'd have like an 1.5 inch scar. They'd just, whip it out like almost just slightly bigger than keyhole, is the way that he put it. But actually, I'd had complications while I was in there, and I woke up and I had 28 staples in my stomach. So that was a bit of a shock as well. I didn't expect that, but I guess I didn't really have time to think about it. I didn't have time. It just happened really quick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, in this process, were you in some of the, I guess, decision making, once after the accidents had happened, were you, coherent to advocate for yourself, or was somebody making decisions about your treatment? Did you have someone kind of speaking on your behalf, or, were you kind of awake enough to let, choose what you would like?
Well, so in terms of like my general care, my solicitor, he was the one who was like calling all the shots, really. So he was choosing all my doctors. He was choosing, especially just like through his network, if you like. And then when it came to my operation, I signed a waiver before I went down. Actually, like they give you this waiver, which you never think you'll see, and it says basically like, I give you permission to do whatever to save my life. So I'd already signed the waiver. So like by the time I woke up, they'd only done their job. But then I wasn't very well, and my dad took over from then. So he was ultimately in charge. And then when I got discharged from the hospital, I went to live with them, and they signed me over to my parents on the assumption that I would stay there for a few months while I recovered more so than I was when I left hospital, just because of the volume in the hospital beds. And they like you to go back home to recover at home. And so they signed me back into their care before I was allowed to go off on my own. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Did the bleeding, did that lead up to the surgery, the internal bleeding?
So I had the bleed after. So I never recovered from that operation. Yeah, so I'd come out, I'd had the operation, I'd come through that, and my scar, my stomach had healed. and I was already trying to like get back to where I was going. And I didn't even think that I had symptoms at the time. I just thought it was because I'd had such a severe like trauma that it was like an impact on that. So I didn't even realize that my body was like depleting at all. And it was just by chance that they caught it, actually. So I was actually on the phone to my doctor for something else. I was on the phone, and he was like, "Can you put that in your diary?" And I went to walk up my stairs in my house, and I was out of breath on the phone. And he was like, "Are you always this out of breath?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know what that is." And he was like, "You've got to go for blood tests." And actually, the symptom of that is having no iron. It's actually being anemic. So I had no iron at all in my blood. Yeah.
Now, was them not, I guess, noticing the bleed before? Because I'm sure, at this point in time, you're kind of continually getting tested and checked out and things like that. Was it not being discovered, something in part to the doctors that you had just, honestly missing it? Or like, was it, something they should have picked up on and missed?
I think that they genuinely did miss it. They genuinely did miss it. But by that time, like COVID had hit. And so, like, in terms of follow-up, so I'd had follow-ups from my operation, but they were all on the phone.
Okay.
So because I hadn't linked my symptoms to anything other than what I knew, I didn't say, "Oh, I've got all this other stuff going on." I literally just thought that's because of my operation. And so then, because they didn't see me, because they couldn't see me because of COVID, there was just almost like a gap. So again, it was just unfortunate. I don't think it was anything that they overlooked. I don't think there's anything that they could have done in that respect. And then the other thing is, when I got to have my transfusions, they said I was really lucky that I hadn't even been in their environment, because COVID would have killed me. Like, if I'd have got COVID, I wouldn't have survived it, because my body would have nothing to fight it.
So pretty much you weren't getting the proper treatment because COVID was here. If COVID wasn't here, they probably would have caught it.
Yeah, they could have. Yeah. So
now, what initially, what were you prescribed? And at that time, how long were you on it for? And did you, kind of start feeling the, being addicted to it, at the time of your first accident?
So at the time of my first accident, I started just on codeine, actually. Taking codeine, and I was taking pregabalin, and I was taking naproxen. I was taking quite a lot of suppressants as well at the time. And I don't know if I knew at the time that I was necessarily like abusing them. I didn't realize that I was just in pain, like physically, emotionally, mentally. I was just in pain, and it just started that I'd be like, "Oh, I'll just take one extra. I'll just take two extra. I've got half an hour to go. I'll just take my dose before then." So it started quite innocently, and then it like ramped up, and then I was taking more and more, and then I was putting in more and more scripts. And obviously 15 years ago when I started that, like, the drugs weren't that like, they were regulated, but they weren't, rightly, I don't know, maybe people were abusing their prescriptions, but they weren't as hot on it. So quite often I put in my prescriptions, and even if they question me, I'd just tell them I've lost it. Like, and so I was able to do that. And then I started doing trams and like amitriptyline. And then it became a way to get away. So like, not only was I like fixing my pain with it, I was also fixing all of my trauma. So like, I was running basically from my mind. I was in quite a comfortable space at the point of my first impact, and I thought I was doing quite well and I was quite happy in my life. And then, like, you know, my relationships were crumbling around me. I wasn't able to make money. My social circle crumbled. Like, all of a sudden I was like shut in a room and I wasn't able to do anything but numb myself. And so that's how I got into that habit. And then the second time when I got into, so I'd come through rehab then. And so the second time I was more aware. I was more aware then of what I was doing, and I knew the risk. I knew what it would be like to come off those drugs. I knew, but again, I needed to save my pain. And so I started taking those medications. And actually, so I am just now, just looking at my calendar. So I've just passed 5 months clean where I have given up everything. I don't take anything anymore. But it took me 15 years to get to that point where I was like, you know what? I can't take these anymore. I can't take them for the rest of my life. They're going to damage me. And not only that, like, I'm hungry, like I could feel. So by the time that I was like aware of my problem that I had the first time, then the second time I could feel my draw, if you like. I knew what my body was doing when it was asking for those things. Yeah. So I mean, and I can see how people relapse really easy. Like, don't get me wrong, coming off them was not pretty.
So
No.
the addiction, the second time, you were more able to control the addiction because of the first time.
Yeah. And I think the fear, because I'd seen what happens. I'd seen what state I got in. And the fear of it really I'd say that probably kept me safer, because I was like, I can't go back there. Like, you know, I've gone backwards enough. I can't possibly go that far back. But then, you know, obviously that had like repercussions as well, because when I came to go to the hospital and they were giving me like my painkillers through my IV for my operation, I was just like, this is having no effect. It's having no effect on me. Like, so obviously my body had like built this resilience to like morphine and opioids, and now then that made my operation so much more painful for me, because I couldn't get, and they were just going, look at you, look at the size of you, you're quite a small person, like, what have you been doing? And I was just like, well, what I've been doing. And so because of that, then I was like, also, I was starting to think, like, if anything else was wrong with my body, like I just, there was no way they could numb it, because I had this resistance to these medicated drugs.
Now, I'm sure with, you know, the number of accidents and the extent of your injuries that most of your issues are, you know, were chronic or are chronic. Now, with that being said, if you know, are totally off of everything, how have you been managing your pain? You know, for anybody that is viewing and going through something of their own, whether it's actually, you know, managing pain or just wanting to get off drugs. You know, how are you able to, you know, kind of manage the trauma and manage the physical pain, you know, to get you through not using anymore?
That's quite a difficult question, because but I like, you know, openly talk to my clients about it. Like, I think a lot of it is all up here. Like, it's all in your mind. And like, once you crack how much you can control with your mind, then you become like a stronger person. And so when I came through the first lot, I was completely unaware that I could even manage this, because like, I think it's a cultural thing here, that you know, if something happens to you, you go to the doctor, they prescribe you some drugs, you trust them that this is a good idea. They've done, I don't know, all amount of training. They give you this, they're licensed, and off you go. Like, I had that trust that was the only thing that could help me. And I turned up again and again and again, and they changed all my scripts all over, and I tried all amount of different things, and I just trusted that was the only way. And it wasn't until far, far later I was like, do you know, I wonder, like, you know, like the damages that have happened to my body, then like my longevity started to worry me. So then I was like, you know, I'm getting a bit older now. And if I start taking these for the next 50 years of my life, like I was already hearing that it would be knocking time off my life. I was already hearing that it would be like cutting my lifespan short. And I was like, oh, I don't, like, I've lost this amount of time to like recovery. I don't want to lose it on the other end of my life as well. And so I started thinking, right, okay. And I did not plan to drop them as I did, actually. I did it on a whim. So I planned to get rid of them, to wean off them during the summertime, during now. But actually at Christmas, I got neurovirus. And I got real sick with that. And then I was back on a drip again. I spent so much time in there, it's not even funny. So I was like back on a drip. And then they were like, right, after 5 days, because I couldn't hold anything down, they were like, right, we'll start putting your pain medication back through your IV before you go into withdrawal. And I was like, do you know, just let me go into withdrawal. And they were like, you're crazy. You're crazy. You cannot drop this amount all cold turkey. And I was like, well, that's the way we're going. It's my body and I don't want you to put it in there. And I didn't realize, actually. So I plummeted into seven brutal weeks of withdrawal. And I guess that really rang true to me then, how much of a problem I had, because of the shock that my body went into. But in terms of like managing my pain now, I think a lot of it like is movement. I make sure that I exercise. I make sure that I stretch every day. I make sure that I'm putting good nutrients into my body. I make sure that I'm looking after my head. So like, you know, just because I'm in more pain one day does not mean that I'm going to be in pain that level the next day. I just have to go like, right, okay, I'll write today off, or I'll look after myself a bit better. I'll take myself to bed. I just have to pace myself a lot better. I just have to plan in, if you like. So if I've got like events coming up or I've got stuff to do, I just have to plan like my care plan and how I look after my body before I get there, and also then in the days afterwards. But it's not an easy balance to strike, and I get it wrong sometimes. Sometimes I don't get out of my bed. And I'm quite realistic about that when I'm talking about it. Like, it's more like a long-term management program than like something that you qualify from and you move on from. It's not like that. But again, just the fear, because I've been so ill, because so much had happened to me, because I've done so much damage to my body. I was like, I just can't keep doing this to my body. Like, if I want the best chance, then I have to. It's just the way that I saw it.
So you actually suffer excruciating pain right now. You kind of tolerate your pain.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I just I can't only imagine. Like, I can't imagine, because I didn't want to get addicted to Percocet, so I wouldn't take them when I was going through my surgery. It's tough to take a pain from like on 100 and just suffer through it. So do you just lay there? How do you like ease the pain?
Yeah. So I lay there, but I get like massages. I do acupuncture, hot baths, hot showers. I've got heat pads. On my bed. Again, though, to keep moving is quite, like, so I learned that much later, like, but when I'd done my first accident, I was just like, oh, don't move, because it's just too painful. And actually you do so much more damage that way. So like, by getting up and moving, you're like lubricating your joints and you're moving your muscles and you're keeping them warm, which helps. So like, it's better. So like, quite often if I'm in like a lot of pain, I'll try and go for a walk, or I'll try and do some Pilates. I'll try and make sure that I can get that movement back into, so that at least I'm not stiff as well. Because like, once you stiffen up, that's like a whole different pain. Yeah.
Absolutely. What kind of sparked your I guess what was the defining moment, that made you want to go into kind of offering support for other people going through this? And what were, I guess, some of the bigger um, issues within, the scenario that kind of made you want, to be able to be a support system for somebody going through it?
I think it sort of actually, it grew over time. It grew over time. So after my first accident, I wasn't really, it didn't even occur to me. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't have helped somebody. It just didn't occur to me that I could help somebody with my experience. I was just like, I need to get back to my life. I need to get back to my life. And then the second time that it happened, I was like, do you know, I'm not sure how many people have this multiple trauma. And so that started ticking in my head. And then I was going to clinics, and I was going to doctors, and I was spending maybe like, some of them I'd be like 15 months, 18 months, 2 years on the waiting list. And I'd turn up and they'd go, "Oh, we've got nothing for you." They'd go like, "We're already really stretched. We haven't got any resources. You're too young to have this. You'll probably always be taking these medications. You'll always be in pain. You have to accept it. You'll probably never get back to work. You'll probably never do this. You'll never recover completely to a point that you will be able to function and feel like you're living your life." And this started ticking on me, and I believed it. I believed it because, again, you turn up to these professions, they've got these tickets, they've got these trainings, and they tell you these things, and it sort of bred such limiting beliefs in my mind. And it wasn't really until I was like properly at my worst that I was like on my knees and I was like begging mercy with the world, that I was like, do you know, no one's coming to save me. Like, they've got all these facts and figures, they've got all of these doctors, but unless I drag it from myself, I've got no chance anyway. And so then I started digging really deep, and I was like, like, you're just going to have to work a little bit harder. You're just going to have to push a little bit harder. You're just going to have to reach a little bit higher. And then that was when I noticed that these facts that I'd been given by the professionals, quite a lot of them were actually facts, but a lot of it was opinion. A lot of it was their opinion, especially coming up through the courts. They were asking them to, diagnose like what the next 10 years of my life would look like. And I was like looking at that, thinking, oh my God. But what maybe they didn't know was my own potential. So they didn't know how hard I was willing to work. They didn't know what I had in me. And I felt like I'd uncovered this. And I was like, And then that's when I started really like listening to my body, and I started doing my own reading, and I started learning how to become more powerful and how to grow and how to get stronger. And then I started and then I was on a roll, and I was like, like, this is good. And then I was like, do you know, all of these other people in the clinics that I'm seeing, they're all being told these things. They're all being told exactly the same as me. And it's just so demoralizing that they think that they can't fix their lives to a point where they're happy and they're functioning. And I was like, this is too big a secret not to uncover. This is too big. And then I was like, all I want to do is stop people from being in that position that I was in, where I was just in a helpless place, and to empower them through their recovery. And that's what triggered me to go and train. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm glad you have. So pretty much the professionals can give you advice, but it's the willpower of yourself. So it's pretty much they'll suppress your pain with drugs instead of saying exercise, move your body, move your joints.
And they're just so, and I understand they're like, they're rammed back through the door, they are swamped with people, but at the same time, they'd be a lot less swamped with people if they started telling them that they could do these other things. Yeah, I know. And much the same as that, like I was like, do you know, all I wanted to do was talk to somebody who'd been through something similar. All I wanted to do was hear somebody else's voice who was saying, oh, yeah, no, I know how you feel. I know that level of pain. I know that PTSD trauma. Like, and I felt I was turning up to these doctors, you know, some of them in really important places in London, some real top doctors. And I'm not saying that they don't know their stuff or that they're not qualified, but I would turn up and they'd be sat at a desk in their suits and they'd be telling me how to cope with this, and I'd be like, have you got like what actual experience do you have of this? And they'd be like, oh, I've got all this, like, you know, I've got all this book experience, which is really rich. And I was like, yeah, I know, but how am I actually going to navigate this, like, emotionally? Like, how am I, like, there was like this big gap, if you like. And because of that need, then I was like, right, like, I'm going to start setting up like community. I'm going to start growing other people so that they can connect to these people, like other people are like.
Yeah, although you've been, able to really kind of beat the odds and, kind of tackle the obstacles that you felt you had, are there still any, physical constraints or limitations, that really kind of bother you, throughout life, whether that's not being able to take a flight longer than 3 hours, or, what are the inconveniences for life in life, that these injuries have presented, that you haven't been able to overcome, or that still present a problem for you?
So quite often my hands get really sore, which means that I can't always, so I got nerve damage in my left as well then, and so like sometimes like my grasp isn't very good, especially when I'm in a lot of pain. Things like, you know, just simple things like chopping like vegetables, or like real like fine manipulative skills. I struggle to stand for long periods of time, but I'm working on it. So I'm of the mindset that I will get better. And if I just stand for 5 minutes longer, 5 minutes longer, 5 minutes longer, like, it doesn't matter how long it takes me to get 5 minutes longer, I can build that. Like, I already know that I can do that. So, some days I can't work, some days I can't get out of bed, some days I don't shower, some days I have to walk around my landing when I get up in the morning before I take the stairs because I can't get down the stairs. But some days I can. Some days I can. And that is, I live for those days because I know that they come around, and I know, like, the weather, it like affects me massively. The winter, the cold really gets into me. I find that really difficult. But now it's starting to get a bit warmer, like I'm moving a bit better. I think really, like, it's strategy all of the time. And when I'm thinking about it, I'm not ever thinking about it as defeat. I'm always thinking like, right, I need another strategy for this. I need another way around this. I need to, like, you know, and so, like, so when I am slightly better, things like chopping my food, I bulk cook. So when I am feeling better, I'll cook loads of meals and I'll stack loads of homemade meals in my freezer. And then on my bad days, I can take that out and I'm like, oh, I've got a homemade ready meal that's actually really nutritious, instead of just eating a giant bag of crisps. Like, I've got like those sort of things in place. So I think it's just balance. It's just balance, and also I think it's probably a good thing to say now that I'm not in that much more pain than I was when I was taking all of those drugs anyway. So I had taken them for so long, my resistance of them was so high that I was still in a considerable amount of pain. And I would say, like, what I've become more, I think it's like a threshold, isn't it? It's a threshold. So if you've got like a pain going on constantly, eventually your body becomes like it's less of a pain, even though it's still the same pain and it's still there constantly. Like you just get used to it, don't you? And so then I always think, like, if I'm to go through more pain now, or if I get more pain, I'll just go through another pain threshold. So I think a lot of it is, again, just in your mind, like the way you set yourself up and the way you think around these things definitely impact the way that you can cope with them. They really do.
Yeah, that's strong. I mean, and I hope folks are really listening to the piece of the mind piece of it and doing other strategies to help you with your pain. Does the pain cause a chemical imbalance? Like, are you ever balanced? Have you failed through the pains, or has your leg given out, or your nerves, have they just weakened on you?
Yeah. So like so I've also got, so down my left side, it goes like down my arm, it goes straight down into my leg, and it goes right down into my foot. Which means like quite often I struggle with that, and I also get sciatica now. So I have to balance my sciatica. So that affects me, and also like then across my stomach, because of the trauma that I had, it affects my bladder. And so sometimes I am incontinent, I have catheters, I have to manage my bladder, so I've had to like train that as well. But I think your brain, again, is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. Like, you see these people, like some people, like athletes or other people in big accidents, they're paralyzed, and then they teach their brain, they learn how to walk again using different stimuli in their brain. They learn a different way. Some people learn a different way of talking, like, so like bits of their brain get shut down, and then they have to make new connections, they have to learn how to talk again. Like, it is not beyond your capacity to learn these things. You just have to really like hone in on them and work on them. It's like a practice. And so and then since I uncovered this, that I could control a lot, I feel like my potential is a lot higher, because I'm like, I'll just give it a go. Actually, like, I'm just game. Like, I've got everything to gain. And so because I've got everything to gain, I'm like, I will just endure that teething. I will just endure that relearning process, because if I don't, then I'm not going anywhere anyway, am I? So if I don't learn to improve, I'll never be improving. And that's another thing that I think is like really valuable, like, just because like we talk about this acceptance thing a lot, how you should accept what's happened, but I think it's quite deceiving how I thought acceptance was accepting that I would never change, accepting that my life would always be like that, or accepting that I do not have the opportunity that I had before. But actually, when I talk about acceptance now with my clients, I actually mean you just have to acknowledge that it's happened. Just acknowledge that it has happened and that you are moving forward. Like, that's what I mean. Like, rather than denying yourself those thoughts and feelings and emotions and trauma around it, just say, okay, that's happened. Like, what now? So that acceptance, like, I think that's quite a deceiving word. It's quite a deceiving word. Yeah.
I agree. I certainly agree. So at this point, is your I guess with your coaching, is that kind of what you've done as far as supporting yourself now, or have you been able to work? What is kind of your status with that? How have you bounced back with that?
Yeah, so I'm just building my business now to a point where I can then come off like my benefit. But I again, like, the systems are so wrong. They're so wrong, because when I rang them up and said, right, I've done this education, I now want to go and help other people. How are you going to help me? They said, you don't have to do this. You can stay exactly where you are. And I said, Yeah, no, I know I could do that, but surely it's my responsibility. If I could help just one person, it is my responsibility to share that knowledge that I've learned. And so I want to grow a business. And they said, right, we wouldn't advise that you do that. We would advise that you stay in a safe place. And I think, again, that's another thing that is wrong with the system, because like, how many people ring up and say, oh, I want to get better, I want to move on, I want to get back to work, and they're telling them you should stay where you are because it's a safe place. Like, it's not a safe place. It's no way to live. It's no way to live. Like, I think it amazes me sometimes, these services, that I'm just like, again, you're telling me my potential, or you're stopping my potential just because of your paperwork. Like, it's not, I don't, it's just not right, really. It's not right.
It's not. It doesn't make sense. I'm like, obviously you wouldn't want to keep paying somebody for the rest of their life if they're saying they want to, become self-sufficient. But to be honest, the fact that you could have even asked that of them is so much different than it is here. Like, they probably would have laughed at you on the phone. In America, it's the resources to kind of bounce back with something like that aren't great, or even heavily offered. So I'm glad that you've at least been able to start that process yourself. Kind of pull yourself up from your
Yeah.
own bootstraps. Because you want to do better, and it kind of sucks that people aren't behind you. Um, the people that should be anyway, or the people that really can make a difference with people that want to make a difference. So that sucks, but once it all comes together, it'll just feel like a greater accomplishment on your part.
And I think as well, like, like when people have been through multiple traumas, I think they really realize what it means to be living.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what it really means to be living. You're not just doing this run of the mill life because you have to, or because you're just going with society. You're not just coming out of school and, like, making friends and settling down and getting a house. Like, you've gone on this massive journey, and then all of a sudden I'm like, do you know, I fought so hard for this life. I better start embracing it. I better start really living it, because I have fought tooth and nail. I've come too far now for me to just sit back and go, I think I'm done. Like,
Yeah, then to just wither away and die.
yeah,
Like, if I was gonna die, I would have did it
no,
already.
yeah,
Understood.
yeah.
Understood. Um, Demetria, do you want to do your 3 things?
Yep, yep, that's funny. So, can you give the audience advice, 2 or 3 things, advice on how to, I guess, because we went through the drug addiction piece for prescribed medicine, how to stay away from prescribed medicine, and how
Mm-hmm.
you ever, or some motivational advice to help them through going through the traumas that you went through.
So, firstly, with that, don't go cold turkey like I did. That was just a bad plan. A bad plan. But like previously, when I'd done it, I just started doing like one less, one less, one less, gently, gently. And so, like, I'd weigh out my meds, and then I was psychologically like putting them back. So, like, I was like teaching myself that I didn't need to just have all of them, because that was the other thing. Like, if they were there, I'd just take all of them. Like, I became more mindful of the ones that I was taking, and then I was putting them back and throwing them away, gently, gently, gently. And I think at the times, like, I still even get these times where I'm just like, all I want is to, like, deal with this craving. I'm like, right, I have to expand. I have to go and find something else to do. So I like, I make sure that I'm out in a wide space, or that I'm communicating with people. I'm not lying about it. Like, I quite openly say to my family now, I'm really struggling, and like asking for that support around you rather than living it on my own is really, really important. In terms of maintaining your recovery, don't underestimate this potential that you have as a human being. Like, it doesn't matter how damaged you think you are mentally or how damaged you think you are physically. If you just keep thinking, you're going to work towards it, you're going to get better. These tiny goals, like the smallest steps are the biggest. I always tell this to my clients. And so when I go way back to my hospital bed, the first goal I set myself was to get out of my bed and walk 10 steps to the toilet to be able to toilet myself. And at the time, that was the biggest goal in my entire life. Like, I was just like, how am I going to do this? But those small steps, those tiny ones, the hardest ones, the ones where you're starting to get the ball rolling, just hang with them. Just hang with them. And also just remember, your mind is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing, and you can brain train it, and you can teach it, and you can override it. You just have to repetitively be thinking these thoughts, and then you make new connectors and you break the negative connectors. And so if you keep thinking that you can do it, ultimately you will be able to do it, because you'll start to believe it and you'll start to live it, and then you will start to move. Like, that is more powerful than I ever imagined I could tell you my brain is.
That's great advice. Thank you. So at this time, you see your banner rolling at the bottom. We like to call this shameless plug. So we gonna get Miss Omni's business running. We gonna get her self-employed and self-reliant. You see how she's rolling. We owe her that much. So if you guys need any assistance with life transformation,
definitely come and check it out. There's like a free community here that I run.
Absolutely.
So you don't even have to pay me anything. You can just come and join my community. I'll let you in. You can get my free resources. You can come and talk to me. You can see my lives. You can see what I'm doing. And I actively help people through there even before they become my clients. So just
absolutely.
come
So
on in.
let the people know exactly where they can go to either contact you or request your services.
Yeah, so your probably best bet is to find me on Instagram or in Facebook. So I'm Omni Wren Transformations in Facebook, and then my community group is Recovery After a Life-Changing Injury. And so if you put that in, you will see my little banner, and then you can request to join, answer a couple of questions, and you come. Yeah, I'll let you in. So also, if you want to direct email me, you can do that too, and I'll send you the details. But just the way that social media works these days is way quicker for you just to find me, and then I'll just approve you in. Thank you very much.
Omni, thank you so much. And it's an honor to have you as a guest on Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast. Give us 1 second. I'm going to come up, close it out, and then let the audience know that we're going to keep sharing life experiences to help others going through similar situations. I hope Omni's life experience touched you. She went through 2 car accidents in a 6-year, after recovering after 6 years, 6 months later, she was in another bad car accident. It caused a lot of trauma, pain, PTSD, prescribed drug addiction. Omni has told y'all how to recover. She went cold turkey, so she does not recommend that you go to cold turkey, that you wing yourself off. We hope that Omni's life experience connects with someone else that's going through a similar situation. And she has a free community, she is a transformation coach. So her Facebook community is Recover After a Life Changing Injury. So please join her Facebook community, and she provides free resources before you become a client. So thank you for choosing Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast. We're going to continue to bring life experiences to you. And thank you for tuning in.